Everyone thought Ellie was just a quiet 13-year-old girl from a small rural town, until the day she spent her last $5 on a dying stray dog. What followed wasn't some fairy tale rescue, but a raw, honest journey of two broken souls slowly learning to breathe again. This isn't just about saving a dog. It's about what happens when someone finally needs you to live. If stories like this mean something to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and stay with us, because this is where everything begins. The sky was pale with late summer haze as Ellie Mae Jensen stepped off the curb outside Max General and Fuel, the soles of her sneakers kicking gravel across the hot pavement. It was Saturday in Brook Hollow, a town so small you could walk its heart in 15 minutes flat. She had $5 in her pocket, crumpled, warm, and meant for the inhaler refill that her mom kept forgetting to pick up. Not that Ellie ever said anything. When you lived with a mother who worked double shifts at the Foodland and barely had time to sit down, you learned not to add weight to already breaking backs. Ellie had asthma, but not the dramatic kind. No ambulances, no ER visits. Just a scratch in the throat when the cornfields turned dry and the air got still. That day, she wasn't planning to need it, not until she saw something out of place beside the gas station's side dumpster. A huddled shape, trembling under the lean shadow of a broken lawn chair. At first, she thought it was trash, a blanket maybe, rolled up and wet. But then, it moved. Ellie squinted, stepping closer. It was a dog, or what was left of one. His ribs showed under the patchy coat like a ladder of worry. Mud clung to his fur. His eyes, one golden, the other clouded, were watching her without lifting his head. Just watching. She crouched without thinking, gravel biting into her knees, heart drumming against the bones of her chest. "Hey buddy," she whispered. He didn't growl, didn't move, just blinked slowly the way her dad had used to blink at her when he'd come home too tired to talk but too soft to ignore her. "Mac," she called, not turning her head. The man who ran the station lumbered out of the service bay with an oil rag slung over his shoulder. "He's been there since Tuesday," he said flatly. "Figured someone dumped him damn near dead. I gave him some water but he won't touch it." "What are you gonna do with him?" she asked. Mac shrugged. "Call animal control Monday. They don't usually keep strays long." Ellie looked back at the dog. His paw twitched once, like he was dreaming of running. "How much to let me take him?" "Take him," Mac laughed, but not meanly. "What for?" "Just how much?" she asked again. "Kid, he's not worth a penny. I have $5. Mac looked at her. Really looked at her then, the thin girl in a faded NASA hoodie. Cheeks, "You're serious?" "I don't want him to die behind a dumpster." Max scratched his beard. "All right, $5. He's yours." Ellie reached into her pocket and handed over every dollar she had, her fingers trembling with something she couldn't name. She took off the hoodie and wrapped the dog in it. His body was light, far too light and warm in the way fever is warm, not life. He didn't resist. He didn't even sigh. Just pressed his nose into the crook of her elbow like he'd always belonged there. Walking home took longer than usual, not because of distance but because of weight. Rusty, she decided to call him, not because of his fur, which had once probably been a deep chestnut but now clung to his body in ash-colored tufts, but because he reminded her of old tools in her grandpa's shed. Worn down, forgotten, but still worth something, maybe. Her mom wasn't home, that helped. She tucked Rusty into the old storage shed behind their duplex, laying him on a pile of old towels from the garage. There was a plastic bowl left from their last yard sale. She filled it with cool tap water and pushed it close. He didn't touch it. Ellie sat beside him, cross-legged in silence, her hands folded on her lap like she was waiting for a miracle to begin. She didn't text anyone, didn't post. It wasn't for attention. It just felt like something she had to do. An hour passed, then two. The sun dropped behind the tree line, staining the shed's dusty window with amber light. When Rusty shifted slightly, just enough to turn his face toward her and give a hoarse whine, Ellie smiled through sudden tears. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered. "I promise." But she didn't know. She didn't even know if she had enough in her to keep him through the night. What she did know was this. She had traded away her comfort, her breath, $5 that meant medicine, for this moment. And somehow, In that quiet space where one soul had chosen not to give up on another, it felt like she had just bought something priceless. The door slammed before Ellie even made it halfway through the kitchen. Her mother stood near the sink, arms crossed, brows pinched so tightly her forehead looked carved from stone. "What is that?" she demanded, voice clipped, eyes narrowing at the bundle moving feebly in Ellie's arms. "It's a dog," Ellie said, too quickly. "His name's Rusty." She meant it to sound calm like an announcement, but the words cracked near the end. Her mother took 2 steps forward and stopped cold. "Is that blood?" "He's not bleeding anymore," Ellie said, cradling Rusty tighter. "I cleaned him up with the water from Max." Her mother's eyes darted to the towels, the mottled red that had already soaked into the hoodie, the smell of wet fur and something metallic. "Jesus, Ellie, he was gonna die, Mom. They were gonna call animal control and let him rot in a cage until they put him down." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," Max said it. Her mother rubbed her temples, then pointed toward the door. "Out. Take it back, I don't care where. We are not keeping a stray dog in this house, especially one that could have God knows what diseases." "He's not sick," Ellie insisted. "Just weak. I can help him." "With what, magic?" her mom snapped. "You don't even have money for your inhaler, and you want to play vet?" That landed like a slap. Ellie's fingers clenched around Rusty's frail body. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were shrinking. She looked down, away from her mother's face, and whispered, "I'll keep him outside." Her mom didn't answer right away, only let out a frustrated sigh before walking back toward the sink. "If he's still here tomorrow, I'm calling the pound." And that was the end of it. No debate, no more raised voices, just silence, heavier than anger. Ellie carried Rusty around the back of the house as quietly as she could. The grass was cool against her sneakers, dotted with dew that hadn't burned off completely. The storage shed stood behind the line of bare tomato planters, a rusted lock dangling open on its latch. Inside, it smelled of old oil and damp wood, but it would have to do. She laid Rusty on a folded tarp, then went back into the garage to grab what supplies she could. An old beach towel, the blue basin her mother used to soak her feet, half a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, and a roll of gauze left over from when her dad sprained his ankle years ago. The sun was sinking, the light turning syrupy gold, and Ellie's stomach growled. But she didn't go in. Instead, she pulled her phone from her back pocket, the screen cracked diagonally like a scar, and searched how to clean a wound on a dog. The signal out back was poor, but eventually a video loaded. A woman in scrubs demonstrating how to flush, dry, and bandage canine injuries. Ellie watched twice, then got to work. Rusty didn't flinch. His breathing was shallow but steady. The first time she poured peroxide onto the biggest cut behind his front leg, the fizzing startled her more than him. She whispered apologies under her breath like a prayer, dabbing carefully, trying to keep the blood from seeping too much into the towel. When she finished wrapping the gauze, she pulled the towel up over his back and sat beside him. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered. "Just like the night before. You have to be." The first night was the hardest. The shed had no insulation, and despite it being August, the temperature dropped sharply after midnight. Ellie woke up 3 times from the cold, and each time padded back outside in her socks, bringing another layer, her old sleeping bag, a flannel shirt, even the bathroom rug. Each time she'd find Rusty still curled in the same place, eyes half-lidded, chest rising faintly. On the 3rd trip, she brought peanut butter crackers and left a piece near his nose. He didn't touch it, but she noticed him sniff once. That felt like something. Morning came with the sound of a mower 2 houses down and her mother banging pots in the kitchen. Ellie stood in the shed doorway, hair tangled, hoodie damp with dew. She knew she couldn't sneak this forever, but if she could just keep him alive another day, maybe her mom would see, maybe she'd understand. She left a note on the fridge, went to check on the garden, be back in time for chores. Then she biked to the drugstore 5 blocks away, the one where her mom sometimes picked up prescriptions. She couldn't afford the good stuff, but she wandered the first aid aisle like a scavenger, found an off-brand saline rinse for $1.49, and 2 packets of antiseptic wipes someone had dropped behind the shelf. She brought them to the counter with 4 dimes and 6 nickels. The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word. Back at the shed, Rusty had shifted. Not much, but enough that she could see he was now facing the door, chin resting on his front paws. "Hi," she said softly, crouching down again. "You waited." She cleaned him again, this time more gently, humming a tune her father used to whistle while sanding down furniture in the garage. Rusty's tail didn't wag, but his ear twitched toward her. She took it as a win. That afternoon, her mother didn't ask about the dog. She saw the mud on Ellie's shoes, the torn towel missing from the linen closet, and said nothing. Ellie took out the trash, folded the laundry, and chopped carrots for dinner like usual. When she slipped out that night with half a grilled cheese hidden in a napkin, no one stopped her. The grilled cheese went untouched, but again Rusty sniffed. His eyes stayed open longer this time, tracking her movements as she moved around the small shed, rearranging things to feel more like a den than a storage room. She lit the old battery lantern and hung it on a nail. Shadows danced along the warped walls. "You should eat," she told him, setting the sandwich closer to his paws. "You don't have to love me. Just don't give up." He blinked, slow and tired. Ellie pulled her knees to her chest and sat back, watching him breathe. Somewhere outside, a car engine turned over, and a screen door slammed. The world continued indifferent. But inside that shed, there was a girl with cracked fingers and a dog with stitched-up wounds, holding onto a thread barely visible, trying like hell not to let go. By the second morning, the air in the shed had turned sour with worry and stale with the scent of wet fabric and antiseptic. Ellie sat cross-legged beside Rusty, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. The pale light filtered through the narrow window above them, catching on particles of dust that floated like ghosts. Rusty hadn't opened his eyes once in almost 48 hours. His body remained limp, breath shallow, like a tide pulling further from shore. Ellie had learned not to expect movement anymore. She didn't even flinch when he didn't respond to her touch. Instead, she worked by rhythm. Clean the wound with saline in the morning, check his temperature with the back of her wrist at noon, and try to coax him to swallow a spoonful of the thinnest rice otter broth she could manage by dinner time. Most of the time, it slid out the side of his mouth, soaking into the towel beneath him. But sometimes, just sometimes, he swallowed. That small movement was the only thing keeping her going. She had found a dropper bottle in the garage, one they'd used to water seedlings once upon a spring, and cleaned it carefully with boiled water. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the cracked straw she'd started with. Every few hours, she'd load a drop of broth, tilt his head gently, and murmur soft encouragements as it dripped down his tongue. "Come on, Rusty," she whispered again and again. "You've got this." The words had lost their strength, but not their meaning. She didn't know if he heard her, but she needed to say them, for both of them. At night, she slept beside him. Not because it was comfortable, it wasn't, but because being apart felt worse. The sleeping bag had lost most of its insulation, but she bundled it tight around her, letting one arm always rest near Rusty's side so she could feel his breathing. She counted those breaths. She lived inside them. That third night, the temperature dropped unexpectedly and a light wind passed through the cracks in the shed wall. Ellie woke twice to add another layer over Rusty, her flannel pajama top, then an old sweatshirt her dad had left in the garage, still smelling faintly of sawdust and coffee. Rusty didn't stir. Around 3 in the morning, she stirred from a restless sleep, heart pounding from a dream she couldn't remember, only to hear it. A sound, wet, ragged, wrong. It took a second to place it. Not wind, not her own breathing. Rusty. His chest hitched violently, air dragging through his throat in short, sharp rasps. Ellie shot upright, blinking into the shadows. "Rusty," she said, already reaching for him. His legs jerked once, then again. His head twisted sharply, mouth open in a silent grimace. Then his entire body ceased. It wasn't like anything she had seen before. His spine arched, paws stiffening, jaws clenched as if biting through pain. His whole frame convulsed, and for a terrifying second, Ellie thought he'd snap something, his own ribs maybe, or his neck. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, throwing the sleeping bag off and crawling toward him on hands and knees. "Please, no, Rusty, please." Her hands hovered, unsure where to touch, what to hold. His eyes had rolled back, his tongue lolled to one side. She reached for his head, cradled it, and felt the heat pouring from him. You're okay, you're gonna be okay." The lie stuck in her throat, but she kept saying it. She held on as tightly as she dared, rocking slightly, her body swaying with the rhythm of his spasms. Then it stopped. All at once, his body fell still, heavy, lifeless. Ellie didn't breathe. Her chest locked up like someone had poured cement between her ribs. "Rusty," she whispered again, but it was too quiet to be real. She lowered her head, pressed her cheek against his ribs, trying to feel for breath, for heartbeat, for anything. For first there was nothing, just skin and bone and silence. Then, faintly, she felt it. A twitch, the smallest expansion beneath her ear. A whisper of life. He was breathing, shallow, fragile, but breathing. Tears filled her eyes, hot and instant. She pressed her face into his side and cried silently, afraid to make a sound that might break the spell. She didn't move for minutes, maybe more. She didn't know what time it was, or how much time had passed. The lantern's batteries had long since died, leaving only the weak gray light of pre-dawn to wash over them. Her hands trembled, not from cold but from the sheer relief of not losing him. Not yet. She finally pulled herself back, wiping her face on the sleeve of her shirt, then checked his pulse again, more carefully this time. His gums were pale but no longer icy. His belly rose and fell in slow waves. Ellie knew now that they were in deeper than she had thought. This wasn't just malnourishment or exhaustion. Something inside Rusty was shutting down, and she didn't have the tools to stop it. But giving up wasn't an option. Not after this. Not after he came back from the edge with nothing but her voice and the pressure of her arms to hold him there. She rummaged through the first aid box, fingers clumsy, and found the last alcohol wipe, then the one packet of sugar she'd taken from the diner 2 weeks ago. It was meant for emergencies, and this felt like one. She mixed it into warm water, barely sweet, but maybe enough to give his blood something to grab onto. She dribbled it into his mouth, a drop at a time. He swallowed, just once, but it was enough. She wrapped him again, tighter this time, layering the flannel shirt and her sweatshirt over the towel beneath him. She didn't sleep after that. She just watched, counted. One breath, another, and when morning finally broke, washing the inside of the shed with light that looked too clean for what had happened just hours before, Ellie sat back on her heels, her spine aching, her eyes swollen, and thought. Ellie hadn't slept more than a few scattered minutes at a time, but when the early morning light slanted through the crooked frame of the shed and cast a soft glow on the dusty floorboards, she was already awake, sitting cross-legged with her back against the wall, hoodie zipped up to her chin, and a wool sock missing on one foot. Rusty lay curled beside her, just as he had for the past 3 nights, still and sunken into the fabric layers beneath him. His chest rose and fell with agonizing slowness, each breath seeming to take a decision. Ellie had begun to whisper numbers in her head, counting each one, afraid to break the rhythm, afraid that if she stopped paying attention, he might stop too. She thought about the dreams she'd had between the fits of half-sleep. Her father, sitting on the porch steps, strumming his old Gibson, tapping his boot against the floorboards and humming the tune he'd always played when she was sick as a little girl. It wasn't a lullaby, not really, but it had a rhythm like rain and warmth and home, and it had always made her feel safe. Now, something inside her needed to hear it again. She dug her phone out from under the crumpled sweatshirt beside her. Its screen cracked but functional. The battery was low, only 9%, but she didn't care. She opened the old music app and scrolled until she found it. Wichita Rain by the Hollow Pines. The guitar strummed out in a low, aching rhythm, and Ellie let it fill the silence. Her fingers rested lightly on Rusty's fur, thin and coarse like dry grass. She didn't expect a miracle, but she needed a moment to remember something that wasn't fear. And then, just as the second verse began, something changed. It was so small she thought she imagined it. A twitch in the muscle of his neck, a slight shift in the way his paw lay against the towel. She leaned forward, breath caught halfway. The music continued, soft and raw. Rusty moved again, more clearly this time. His head lifted just barely off the towel, then dropped. But in that single motion he turned toward her. His nose brushed against her wrist. It wasn't strong, wasn't sure, but it was there. Ellie's throat caught, and before she could even speak, he made a sound. A hoarse, broken whine like gravel turning over in his throat. It was the first sound he'd made in days. It broke her open. She dropped the phone, not caring, as it thudded softly against the shed wall, and cupped his face in both hands. His eyes blinked once, unfocused but searching. "Rusty," she whispered, choking on the name. "You're here. You're really here." The tears came so fast she didn't feel them at first. They fell onto his fur, warm and frantic, and she let them. He didn't move again, but the connection had been made. He had reached for her. Somehow, in the fog of pain and starvation and whatever sickness gripped him, he had found her hand and said. She stayed like that for a long time, not daring to break the moment. When she finally stood up, her legs were numb and her fingers trembled. She left the shed in silence, crossed the yard in bare feet wet with dew, and entered the kitchen through the back door. Her mother was standing at the sink, scraping burnt egg from a pan. The smell of scorched butter hung heavy in the air. "He moved," Ellie said quietly, like confessing a secret. Her mother didn't turn. His head lifted. He touched my hand. The scraping continued, and he made a sound. Her mother sighed, then turned off the faucet and leaned against the counter. "Sweetheart," she said, not unkindly but with weariness laced through every syllable. "Dogs sometimes twitch even after they're gone." "It's no, Mom. This wasn't that. He knew I was there. He turned toward me when I played Dad's song." Her mother flinched almost imperceptibly at the mention of her late husband. She set the pan down harder than necessary. "You've been out there for days, barely eating, not sleeping. I know you want to believe he's getting better, but you have to understand, sometimes they don't." Ellie felt her throat tighten again, but this time she swallowed the urge to cry. "He's fighting," she said, "and so am I." Her mother didn't answer, only stared at her for a long moment before returning to the stove. Back in the shed, Ellie gently wiped Rusty's muzzle with a damp cloth, careful not to jostle him too much. His eyes were closed again, but his breathing was deeper, more even. She tried offering water from the dropper, and this time he swallowed 2 full drops without spilling. Progress. She sat beside him and resumed the playlist, playing Wichita Rain on loop until the phone finally died, the screen fading slowly like a curtain being drawn. But the melody lingered in the air, and in her chest. That night, Ellie wrote in the small spiral notebook she kept tucked in her hoodie pocket, something she hadn't touched since the start of summer. Day 4. He moved. He found me, still here. She underlined the last 2 words 3 times. Around dusk, she stepped into the kitchen again, moving quietly, hoping to steal some bread and peanut butter before her mother noticed. But the kitchen was empty, and beside the stove sat a small bowl, rice, warm broth, and a note. "If he can keep this down, maybe you were right." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a surrender, but it was a thread. Ellie carried it like glass across the yard, careful not to spill a drop. She knelt beside Rusty, set the bowl down, and whispered, "Let's prove her wrong." The rain had started sometime in the early hours, tapping softly against the tin roof of the shed, like a timid knock at a closed door. Ellie woke to the damp chill and the familiar scent of wet earth mixed with dog fur. She stretched carefully, trying not to jostle Rusty, but when she turned to check on him, she found nothing but the slightly sunken imprint of where he'd been. "Heart lurch," she called in a hushed voice, her breath catching mid-syllable as she scanned the shadows. The shed door was slightly ajar, the bottom edge lined with muddy streaks. Panic climbed into her chest like fire. She threw off the sleeping bag, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and sprinted barefoot into the rain, which had turned from a drizzle to a steady fall. The grass soaked her feet instantly. "Russ!" she shouted again, louder this time, voice cracking. She rounded the corner of the house and skidded to a stop. There he was, curled up just beneath her bedroom window, his chest rising and falling as his nose rested on the cold, wet soil. His front paws were folded awkwardly, one leg dragging slightly behind him, and his coat was plastered to his thin frame by the rain. He had made it maybe 20 feet from the shed. Ellie stood frozen for a beat, unsure whether to laugh or cry, then dropped to her knees in the mud beside him. "Here," she whispered, running a trembling hand along his back. He blinked at her, slow but deliberate, and let out a small sigh as if the journey had taken every ounce of strength he had left. She understood immediately. He wanted to be near her, not hidden away, not tucked into a dark corner like a broken thing. He wanted to see her window, the place she slept, the space where she belonged. He had pulled himself through pain and mud just to be close. She knelt with him there, both of them soaked and shaking until the wind picked up and drove the rain sideways. With effort and careful hands, she coaxed him up, guiding his unsteady frame back toward the shed, pausing every few feet so he could rest. He didn't resist. He didn't panic. He trusted her. That trust, new and fragile, was more powerful than anything she had ever felt. Back inside, she toweled him dry with the last clean cloth and placed her own pillow beneath his head. Then she curled next to him on the floor, heart hammering with the aftershock of fear and pride. Later that morning, after the rain had slowed to a drizzle, Ellie made her way inside to grab the rice broth and charge her phone. She slipped through the back door as quietly as she could, but her mother was already in the kitchen, standing at the sink with a coffee mug cradled in both hands. "You're soaked," her mom said, not turning around. "He left the shed," Ellie replied softly, pulling the sleeves of her hoodie over her hands. "He crawled to my window. He wanted to be near me." Her mother was silent. The faucet dripped steadily into the steel basin, the only sound in the room for a long moment. "I carried him back," Ellie added. "He's not strong yet, but he's trying." Her mom finally turned, eyes lined with fatigue, not just from work but from weeks of strain, unspoken grief, and the quiet erosion of what used to be simpler. She didn't speak. She only nodded once, slowly, then looked away again. That evening, as the clouds broke and golden light spilled across the wet grass, Ellie opened the shed door to find a small, unexpected shape waiting for her on the threshold. A paper grocery bag, rolled at the top and tied with twine. She crouched beside it, fingers cautious as she unrolled the edges. Inside was a bag of dry dog food, a packet of liver-flavored treats, and a plastic scoop. No note, no explanation, just the quiet offering of someone not ready to say the words but willing to act. Ellie pressed her palm to the paper and closed her eyes for a second. Rusty watched from his spot on the bedding, head slightly lifted, eyes alert. She smiled and whispered, "Looks like someone's coming around." That night, she fed him from the new bowl she'd cleaned and placed near the corner where the light from the lantern reached. He ate slowly, carefully, chewing each bite with visible effort. When he finished, he licked the bowl clean and then rested his head against her shin. She didn't move for a long time. The sound of crickets returned to the night air, mixing with the gentle creak of wood and the far-off hum of power lines. The world outside kept spinning, but inside the shed, a different kind of stillness took hold, the kind that doesn't come from silence, but from something beginning to heal. The next morning brought fog, thick and low, curling around the base of the trees and crawling across the yard like a living thing. Ellie opened the shed door to let in the light and air, and Rusty, as if sensing the shift, rose slowly to his feet, his legs wobbling but holding. He stood, truly stood, for the first time since she had brought him home. Ellie covered her mouth, afraid to speak, afraid it might be a dream. He took one step, then another, shaky and uneven but determined. That was when she heard the floorboards creak behind her. She turned and saw her mother standing in the doorway of the house, arms crossed, not in judgment, but in something closer to caution, perhaps even awe. She didn't speak, didn't offer approval, but she didn't look away either. She simply watched, silent and still, as Rusty planted his feet and lifted his head high enough to meet Ellie's eyes. The fog had lifted by midday, leaving behind damp grass and that raw brightness only a freshly cleared sky can offer. Ellie knelt on the porch steps, unzipping the worn coin pouch she kept tucked into the lining of her backpack. It held exactly $3.17, mostly in dimes, and a folded grocery receipt with her father's handwriting scribbled faintly on the back. An old list of motor oil brands and socket wrench sizes he had written before his last job. She carried it like a talisman, as if some part of him clung to the loops of his lowercase r and the pressure of his pen strokes. The day before, Rusty had tried to stand twice. His legs wobbled, trembling like reeds in the wind, but each time he had looked straight at her before collapsing. Ellie knew he needed more than rice broth and hope. He needed medicine, real medicine, and there was only one place she could think of: Clarkson's Pharmacy. The building sat at the edge of town, just before the soybean fields started, its windows faded and shelves sparsely stocked. Inside, Time moved slowly. Shelves lined with dust-coated boxes, and a small brass bell above the door rang each time a customer entered. Ellie hadn't been inside since her father's funeral, when Mrs. Clarkson had handed her mother a free inhaler and whispered, "No rush on that kind of kindness stayed with you." The bell rang as she stepped inside, her damp sneakers squeaking slightly on the worn linoleum. The air smelled of eucalyptus and cardboard. Mrs. Clarkson stood behind the counter, half reading a paperback mystery with the cover torn. She looked up, adjusted her glasses, and smiled gently. "Ellie Mae Jensen," she said, not surprised. "I was wondering when you'd come around." Ellie stepped closer, heart thudding. "Hi, Mrs. Clarkson. You all right, sugar?" "I need something," Ellie said quickly, then lowered her voice. "For a dog, not just vitamins or salves. He's really sick. Infection, I think. He had open wounds and they're not healing fast enough." Mrs. Clarkson put down the book. "A stray?" Ellie hesitated. "Not anymore." The woman nodded slowly, as if that answered everything. "You know I'm not supposed to give out prescriptions without a vet's order." "I know," Ellie whispered. "I just thought, he doesn't have anyone else. And I think he might make it if I can just keep the infection from spreading. You know how to dose him? I've been reading. I'll be careful." "And your mama doesn't know?" "No," Ellie said. "And she can't?" Mrs. Clarkson looked at her, really looked, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the damp cuffs of her jeans, the fierce grief and resolve tangled in her 12-year-old frame. "Your daddy would have done the same," she said finally, then turned to a small locked cabinet and pulled out a dusty box labeled Cephalexin Expired. "They are old, but they'll still do the trick. Small dose, once in the morning, once at night. With food." Ellie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you." "I didn't see you today," the woman added, "and if anyone asks, you're just buying cough drops." Ellie smiled, the kind of quiet, grateful smile that carried more weight than thank yous ever could. Back at the shed, she crushed the first tablet and mixed it into a spoonful of canned chicken her mother had left on the back porch without a word. Rusty licked it off her fingers, slow but steady. The next day, she did the same, and the next. Time slowed, measured only in the way his breathing deepened, or how long he could stay upright before needing to lie down. She marked his progress with chalk lines on the shed wall, each one a tiny victory. Day 6, day 7, day 8. On the 10th day, Ellie was crouched near the edge of the yard, pulling weeds for her mother's neglected tomato patch, when she heard the soft scrape of claws on the wooden threshold behind her. She turned, expecting to see Rusty curled in the doorway like usual, basking in filtered sunlight. Instead, she saw him standing. Not for a second, not in panic. One paw dragged slightly, his back legs trembled. But he stepped forward, and then again. Ellie froze, hands still buried in the soil. Her breath caught as Rusty took a third step, awkward, cautious but sure. He limped toward her like he had rehearsed it in his sleep, like he'd mapped the distance in his moment with purpose. When he reached her, he lowered his head and pressed his muzzle softly into her forearm. Not to ask for food, but simply to say, "I'm here, I made it." Ellie dropped the weeds and knelt beside him. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She only wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in the damp fur, letting the tears fall where they wanted. He didn't move away. He let her hold him. That evening, when her mother stepped out to water the single basil plant still clinging to life in a chipped clay pot, she saw them, Ellie and Rusty in the yard, side by side. Not playing, not running, just walking in slow circles like two quiet survivors testing the shape of a world they were trying to rebuild. Her mother didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The air in the shed had changed. It no longer smelled only of gauze and rain-soaked towels, but of warm fur and dried kibble, of breath that didn't strain and sleep that no longer teetered on the edge of stillness. Rusty was healing. It didn't happen all at once, and it wasn't always visible, but there were signs. New ones, hopeful ones. He'd begun to eat more than just scraps and spoon-fed broth. He licked his bowl clean, then sniffed around for more. Tail flicking once, slow but certain. Ellie took to waking up a little earlier just to watch him sleep. Not because she feared he'd stop breathing, but because watching him curled comfortably, paws twitching gently in dreams, filled her with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. 10 days after his first steps, she received a package she hadn't expected. It arrived in a cardboard box, dropped unceremoniously on the porch by the mail carrier, addressed to Ellie Jensen, Brook Hollow. No return name, only the initials WCRR. And a zip code Ellie didn't recognize. She opened it slowly, careful not to rip the label in case she needed to trace it. She opened the note first. "Dear Ellie." It began in clean serif type. "One of our volunteers came across a message you posted in an old pet forum, asking for advice about treating an injured stray. Your words struck us, not because of their detail but because of their honesty. You didn't beg for help. You didn't dramatize. You simply said, 'He wants to live. I just want to help him do that.' Taking care of a life is never small, especially when you're just a kid. That's a kind of bravery people forget to notice." Ellie paused, fingers trembling slightly over the paper. Enclosed is a small pet first aid kit, some basic supplies, and a few links to low-cost rural vet options in your area. "We can't do much, but we want you to know someone sees you, and they're rooting for both of you. With care, West County Rescue and Rehab." Ellie traced the last line with her fingertip, reading it again and again, until it embedded itself into her chest like warmth. She brought the box into the shed with both hands, setting it down beside Rusty like it was a treasure chest. He lifted his head slightly, eyes alert, tail giving a faint thump against the blanket. "Look what we got," she whispered. Inside the kit was everything she'd once dreamed of having when she first found him. Wrapped sterile gauze, a small thermometer, blunt scissors, antiseptic spray, ear wipes, even a tiny laminated guide labeled "How to Read a Dog's Pain." She unpacked each item carefully, explaining it to Rusty like she was giving a class. "This is for boo-boos on your paws," she said, holding up the wipes. "This is for when you won't stop scratching behind your ears." Rusty blinked slowly, as if considering each item before resting his chin back down on his paws, satisfied. That afternoon, the sun poured golden through the shed window, and Ellie decided to pull something she hadn't touched since before her dad passed away. His old Olympus camera, dented on the side, wrapped in a canvas bag with 2 extra rolls of film. She had found it in the closet last fall, buried behind boxes of shoes and a jar of fishing hooks, and had moved it into her room without a word. He used to take photos of mundane things. Hands holding coffee, the corner of their roof against the sky, her sneakers beside his boots. "Pictures aren't about big moments," he used to say. "They're proof that you noticed." Ellie loaded the film clumsily, her fingers slower than his had been, and brought it out to the shed just in time to see Rusty rise slowly from his blanket, stretch one paw forward and, upon seeing her, wag his tail. Not wildly, not fast, just once. But it was real. Her heart jumped. She lifted the camera and snapped before the moment could slip away, the shutter clicking with a sound that filled the space like laughter. She developed the photo a week later at the corner print shop. It came out slightly overexposed, but in it you could see Rusty's soft eyes looking straight at her, and the blurry motion of his tail like a secret only the two of them shared. She pinned it to the inside wall of the shed above his bed, right next to the chalk markings of his recovery days. Day 17, first tail wag. Ellie wrote it in pen. The next morning, she found a folded note inside the food bag left by her mom. It read simply, "Keep going. You're doing good." There was no signature, but Ellie knew the handwriting. Her mother still didn't say much, but sometimes she lingered near the back steps a few seconds longer. Sometimes she left bits of bacon from her own breakfast in a paper napkin beside the door. And once, when she thought Ellie wasn't watching, she smiled when Rusty barked for the first time. Short, sharp, startled by a squirrel but healthy, full-throated and proud. The test paper lay face down on the kitchen table, its red ink bleeding faintly through the thin page like a wound that refused to hide. Ellie stood beside the counter, backpack still slung over one shoulder, sneakers muddy from cutting through the side path home. Her mother didn't need to flip the paper. She had already read the grade when she signed for it earlier that afternoon. 47. Science, lab write-up, half-finished answers, and a blank conclusion. Ellie hadn't had time to finish it. She'd spent that night at the shed, when Rusty threw up twice after his dinner, when his body shivered despite the extra blanket, and she'd stayed there until the sun began to rise behind the barn. "This isn't just about a dog," her mother said, voice low, restrained in that way that always made it feel worse. is about you. You're 13, Ellie. You're still a kid. You have school, your health, your life. Ellie said nothing, fingers gripping the strap of her backpack like it could anchor her to something steadier. You're barely sleeping. You're skipping breakfast. And now you're failing. Her mother pushed the paper forward. You think Rusty would want you doing this? Ellie looked up sharply. He didn't ask for anything. I did. I brought him here. I chose to keep him alive. Her mother's mouth flattened into a line. You're saving him by losing yourself. That's not balance, that's sacrifice. And your dad, she stopped herself, but the words hovered already spoken in her breath. Ellie stepped back, her voice harder than she felt. Say it. Her mother hesitated. Then, your dad was the same. He threw himself into other people's pain, spent every ounce of energy on strangers, and then when he needed help, no one was there. He died for someone else's mistake. The words hit like gravel to the chest. Ellie blinked. He didn't die because he cared, she said. He died because no one listened. Her mother turned away, reaching for the sink, rinsing a dish that didn't need rinsing. The silence between them expanded. That night, the shed was colder than usual, despite the thick air of summer holding on to its last edge. Ellie sat curled against the wall, hoodie zipped to her neck, watching Rusty curl into himself like he'd learned the art of being small. She could hear the blood in her ears, rushing, thick, uneven. It was always like this before it came. Her chest felt tighter than it should, and her breath came shorter, not panicked but shallow, like she could never quite get to the bottom of her lungs. She reached for her inhaler out of habit, fingers brushing the empty fabric pouch beside her. Nothing. It was still in her school bag, forgotten in the rush to escape the kitchen. She sat still, counting her breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the school nurse had taught her. It helped for a while, until it didn't, until the tightness pressed deeper, into the ribs, into her spine, and she had to lie back on the makeshift bedding, palms flat, eyes searching the wooden ceiling for a pattern to cling to. Rusty lifted his head when she exhaled hard. His ears perked, not in panic but in attention. He crawled slowly across the blanket and laid his head against her stomach, grounding her. Ellie coughed once, sharp and dry, and then reached out to him. Her voice came out raspy, broken at the edges. I didn't save you to prove anything, she said, each word slow like walking barefoot across stones. And I'm not trying to be brave. I just couldn't let you die alone in a place that didn't even care you were alive. Rusty nudged closer. You looked at me that day like you knew you were already invisible, Ellie continued. And I know what that feels like. I know exactly what that feels like. Her breath hitched again. She swallowed hard. I can't fix everything. I don't even know if I fixed you. But at least you didn't have to be scared when it happened. She paused, blinking at the sting behind her eyes. If it happens to me, I just hope someone holds my hand too. Her fingers curled into Rusty's fur. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to matter to something. Rusty shifted, his tail tapping softly once against her leg, as if in reply. The storm outside rolled in just after midnight, bringing wind that howled through the trees and rattled the shed walls like a warning. Ellie breathed slowly, feeling her chest loosen just enough to keep the panic from spilling over. Her mother hadn't come to check. Maybe she thought Ellie was asleep. Maybe she was too angry. Maybe she was afraid she was right. But Ellie knew something now. Knew it like marrow. Saving Rusty had saved her too. Not in the big, dramatic ways people think of. Not with medals or rescue missions. But in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. In the moments where something small chooses to live because someone else stayed. The morning sun broke across the yard in long, golden beams that slid between the leaves and painted the grass in soft light. Ellie stood near the back door with one hand holding a loop of rope fashioned into a makeshift leash, the other resting gently on Rusty's shoulder as he sat beside her, tense but steady. It had been nearly a full week since the asthma scare, since she whispered her truths into the folds of his fur, since he laid still beside her through a night where her lungs and heart had both seemed too tired to continue. Since then, something had shifted, not dramatically, not in one big moment, but like a slow thaw. She'd begun taking her medication again, not because her mother reminded her but because Rusty watched her every move now, and she didn't want to fail his faith in her. Her mother hadn't said much, just left a brown paper bag outside the shed one morning with an inhaler tucked inside, labeled in careful handwriting. Keep it close. Ellie hadn't mentioned it out loud, but she'd kept it in her hoodie pocket every day since. Rusty, too, had transformed in subtle, meaningful ways. He was eating without coaxing, sleeping soundly through the night, and, perhaps most remarkable of all, he had started to stand on his own without hesitation. His gait was still uneven, his right hind leg dragging a bit when he moved too fast, but his eyes were bright again, and when Ellie opened the shed door each morning, he was already up, tail tapping the wooden floor softly in greeting. So today, Ellie had decided it was time to try something they hadn't dared attempt since the first week he'd arrived. A walk beyond the walls of the shed. Not a long one, not across town or even down the road, just a lap around the backyard. Slow and patient, a quiet celebration of the ordinary. She clipped the makeshift leash onto his collar, adjusted the knot once, then looked at him. "Ready?" she asked softly. Rusty didn't bark or whine, just leaned slightly into her leg as if to say, "I trust you." So they stepped off the porch together, one cautious step at a time. The grass was still wet from the morning dew, and Ellie felt it seep through the fabric of her sneakers almost immediately. But she didn't care. The air smelled clean, like turned soil and distant honeysuckle, and birds chirped from somewhere above, filling the silence with a kind of quiet encouragement. Rusty walked beside her, head low, tongue flicking occasionally at the air, like he was reacquainting himself with a world he'd once been too broken to notice. They circled the tool shed, past the old swing set her dad had built from reclaimed wood, now gray with weather and time, and followed the curve of the fence toward the far end of the yard, where the ground sloped slightly downhill and the soil grew softer. Ellie guided Rusty carefully, not tugging, just matching his pace. She noticed how his ears perked when they reached the shaded patch near the oak tree, how he sniffed the base of the trunk and stood still for several seconds, remembering something, maybe nothing, but completely still, as if absorbing the moment. Then they reached it, the corner of the yard that still bloomed despite the neglect, a crescent of soil marked by white chrysanthemums, their petals soft and full, facing the early sun. Her father had planted them the year Ellie turned 10, said they reminded him of snowfall and peace. No one had tended the garden since his funeral, but somehow the flowers kept coming back, year after year, fragile but persistent, like memories that refused to fade. Ellie stopped walking. Rusty did too, his body stilled in a way different from fatigue, deliberate, alert. Then, without warning, he lowered himself slowly to the ground, tucking his legs beneath him with effort and care. He settled directly in front of the chrysanthemums, eyes fixed not on the flowers but on Ellie. She met his gaze and something in her chest tightened, not with sadness, not quite with joy, but with the unmistakable ache of something sacred passing between them. Rusty blinked slowly, his head tilted, just slightly. It was the same look he gave her when she played her father's song that morning so many days ago. The same softness, the same awareness. He was saying something, not in words, not even in gesture, but in the language that lives only between two beings who have survived something together. Ellie sat down in the grass across from him, letting the rope slack between them, and placed her hands in her lap. She didn't need to speak. Instead, she looked at the flowers and remembered how her dad used to kneel beside them every spring, whispering to the soil like it could hear him. He always said gardens were promises, that you planted them not for today but for someday. That's what this was, she realized, this moment. A promise kept. Rusty had made it. She had made it, not because they'd done something extraordinary, but because they'd done the quiet, hard thing, again and again, every day, until the world made space for them to breathe. The wind stirred slightly, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older. Rusty shifted, not to stand but to inch a little closer, front paws brushing against the grass near her knee. Ellie reached out and let her fingers rest on his neck. His fur was warmer now, thicker. She could feel the strength returning beneath it. She wanted to take a picture, wanted to capture the way the light played in his eyes, the way the white petals framed the shape of his body. But her hands wouldn't move. Some things you don't interrupt, even to remember them better. Some things are already eternal. The classroom buzzed with soft anticipation as students filed in, their summer-tanned faces curious and half-distracted by the rare appearance of something out of routine. It was the Friday before the school year officially began, a tradition at Brook Hollow Elementary, Special Story Day, where each student was invited to share a story that mattered to them. Usually the tales ranged from vacations gone wrong to grandparents who fought in wars or dogs who could skateboard. But this year something felt different. The moment Ellie Jensen walked in with Rusty beside her. The leash she held wasn't store-bought, still knotted from the same rope she'd used weeks ago, but clean and wrapped twice around her wrist. Rusty moved with careful steadiness, his gait more confident than anyone but Ellie would understand. His eyes scanned the rows of desks, but never wandered far from her. He wore no collar tags, no service vest, but the quiet way he held himself, alert, grounded, unshakably present, commanded the room more surely than any announcement. Mrs. Harvey, the fifth-grade teacher who had known Ellie since she was small and restless and always scribbling stories in the margins of her math homework, greeted them at the front of the room with a curious, supportive smile. "You sure you want to go up there?" she whispered as Ellie reached the podium. Ellie nodded, her fingers resting gently on Rusty's back. "I think it's time." The students sat, eyes forward, notebooks and snack wrappers tucked away. Ellie took a breath and began. "Hi, I'm Ellie. I didn't really know what story to tell at first because this summer wasn't like other summers. I didn't go anywhere special, I didn't do camp or sports or sleepovers. But I met someone, and that changed everything." She glanced down at Rusty, who now lay beside the podium, ears perked. "You didn't rescue him, if that's what you're wondering." "Not really. He was the one who found me. I just said yes. That's all. Said yes to not looking away, said yes to trying, said yes to staying, even when it got hard." A few students shifted in their seats, leaning forward now. "I won't tell you about the blood or the nights I didn't sleep or the times I thought I'd lose him. That's not the story. The story is, this one night I was scared, not just a little scared, the kind of scared where you feel like maybe you don't matter enough to stay. And then I looked at him, this broken, half-alive creature who had every reason to give up, and he looked back like I was the only thing he had. In that moment I realized something." She paused, let the silence settle. "For the first time in my life something needed me, not because I was strong or smart or good, just because I stayed. And needing to be needed, that's what saved me." The room was quiet in the way rooms get when no one wants to ruin the shape of what just happened. Even Mrs. Harvey didn't speak for a beat. Then a few students began to clap, slowly at first and then more joined in, not loud but real. Ellie didn't bow or smile big. She just looked down at Rusty, who looked up at her with eyes that had seen her at her worst and still stayed. As the class moved on to the next speaker, Ellie returned to her, sat cross-legged on the floor beside Rusty, and leaned her shoulder gently against his. The rest of the morning blurred, other stories, bursts of laughter. A moment where a boy cried when mentioning his grandmother's garden, but none of it pulled Ellie away from the quiet between her and Rusty. When the bell rang, students began gathering their backpacks, voices rising again into the familiar noise of dismissal. Ellie moved slowly, tucking her notebook into her bag, adjusting the rope leash so it wouldn't drag. That's when it happened. Rusty, who had been still and observant the whole time, stood, walked the short distance from where he lay to Ellie's feet, and placed something gently in her open palm. It was a scrap of cloth, small and frayed at the edges, once white, now stained with faint brown and pink. Ellie recognized it immediately. It was the corner of the first towel she'd used the day she brought him home. The one she wrapped around his trembling body. The one she soaked in warm water to clean the dried blood from his ears and paws. She hadn't seen it in weeks, thought it had been buried under blankets or tossed during one of the cleanups. But Rusty had kept it, hidden, chosen this moment to return. Ellie looked at him, heart swelling with a kind of quiet awe. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He simply waited, eyes locked on hers, as if to say, "I remember." Ellie closed her fingers around the cloth, held it to her chest for just a second, then reached down to stroke behind his ears. "I remember too," she whispered. The sun filtered through the classroom windows in a soft glow, catching the edge of her hair and the curve of Rusty's back as they stood together, just a girl and her dog, but something far deeper than that, something built from nights without answers and days full of effort no one saw. They walked out of the classroom into the late summer light, the sound of other kids and cars and life all around them. But for a moment, none of that mattered. The story had been told, and this time, no one had to be alone. If this story touched something in you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what moment stayed with you the most. Was it when Ellie first found Rusty, or when he finally stood again? Let me know where you're watching from too. Drop a comment. I read every single one.